Thank you very much, Mary. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
And thanks to ForWomen.Scot for inviting me to speak. As Maureen said, I'm a member of the Women's Human Rights Campaign which developed the Declaration on Sex-Based Rights. The Declaration reaffirms that women's rights in international human rights law, such as the UN Convention to End Discrimination Against Women, the CEDAW, and the UN Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, are based on women's experiences as a sex, a biological sex, and not based on gender identity. We use the UN Gender Equality Glossary's definition of sex, which is the physical and biological characteristics that distinguish males from females. That used to be a widely agreed definition. It's being disputed more and more. That's the definition that we use. The glossary defines gender as socially constructed roles and behaviours that society sees as appropriate for men and women. So our starting point is that sex is immutable, it can't be changed. But gender is socially constructed and changes over time and place. It's different in different cultures. The gender roles that are played out are different at different times in history and in different cultures and locations. And the rights which women and girls have gained in international law, most of which we've gained very recently, mostly since after the Second World War, when a lot of human rights provisions came into being, are based on the recognition that the particular forms of inequality and discrimination that women and girls face are based on our experiences as a biological sex. So, for example, control of women's reproductive capacity is something that only can be experienced by women. Harmful traditional practices relating to female children, such as female genital mutilation, sex discrimination in employment, including pregnancy discrimination, and the very high levels of physical and sexual violence that women and girls experience internationally, which has been described by the World Health Organization as a global epidemic of basically similar to a worldwide health epidemic. They view it in health terms because it is so widespread internationally and it has such high levels internationally. But in recent years there's been what is really a worldwide campaign to replace biological sex as a social and legal category with the category of gender identity. Many countries are changing their law to recognise gender identity in law, and they're giving priority to gender identity over biological sex in law and as a social category. And one aspect of those campaigns is the campaign to allow anyone to change their gender in law simply by declaring themselves to be of the gender. And more recently, there's a push to be able to declare yourself as non-binary. That is being proposed without any assessment or any prerequisites, that anyone can simply declare, I'm a man. A biological male can declare, I'm a woman, and the biological woman can declare, I'm a man. The Scottish Government, as you all know, I'm sure, is now proposing to introduce self-declaration, and that would have one prerequisite, which is that a person must have lived as a member of the other sex for a period of 3 months, following which they can make a statutory declaration in front of a notary, like a solicitor. So it's a formal, solemn promise, in a way, a statutory declaration. It would be a criminal offence to lie in the statutory declaration. Once they've made that declaration that they want for the rest of their lives to be a different gender or sex, I don't know how it would be described because the two words keep getting conflated and confused, after which there will be a 3-month waiting period of reflection, and then at the end of that 3 months it will be confirmed. There's no medical assessment as there is currently. It would simply be self-declaration. And in 2016, the House of Commons Women and Equalities Committee made a very similar recommendation, except that they didn't include any prerequisites at all. They recommended that a person should be able to change their legal sex simply by completing a statutory declaration form. If self-declaration is introduced, it will be a significant step to replacing the concept of biological sex in law with the concept of gender identity. And that will lead to the erosion of women's sex-based rights. It already is, in practice, leading to the erosion of women's sex-based rights. If we can't name ourselves as a sex, we can't name the specific inequalities and discrimination that we face. And so we can't challenge those inequalities. In the most extreme form of gender identity ideology is contained in a document, or two documents, because there's a supplement, called the Yogyakarta Principles, which are widely promoted as international best practice in relation to gender identity by various lobby groups. The Yogyakarta Principles have no status in international law, and they have no formal status in any type of law. But governments, including the Women and or government bodies, including the Women and Equalities Committee in Westminster, have described them as international best practice because this is what they're being told. The principles, or the Principles Plus 10, which were published in 2017, call on all states to end the registration of the sex and gender of the person in ID documents such as birth certificates, ID cards, passports, and so on, as part of their legal personality. In other words, the ultimate aim of the most extreme form of gender identity ideology is to remove sex and gender markers completely from law and from society's understanding of what it is to be a human being, because ultimately that is what the proposal is about. It's changing our beliefs, or our whole conception, I think, of what it means to be human. But in the meantime, the Principles Plus 10 say, until this is achieved, what they want states to do is to introduce self-declaration with no assessment and no prerequisites, and that includes no minimum age requirements. So what they are advocating is that a child of any age would be able to declare themselves to be a different gender, and that there should be no assessment of a person's mental capacity in making that decision either. So no prerequisites, no assessments of any kind. And criminal offences of any kind should not be treated as a barrier, the principal states, to self-declaration of a different gender. Self-declaration is already happening in practice, even though it's not written into law, as a result of the work of various lobby groups. In the UK, it's led to male sex offenders who claim to be trans women being put in women's prisons. And in one prison that we know of, there may be other instances, 2 women were sexually assaulted by a trans prisoner called Karen White, while White was on remand waiting to be tried on rape charges. Was put on remand in a women's prison. Rona will talk about what's happening in prisons in more detail. Police services are recording offenders according to their gender identity now, rather than their sex, and that will lead to inaccurate data recording on patterns of violence against women and children. It will also lead to inaccurate recording about patterns of violence towards trans people. And if we don't accurately record offences, particularly violent offences and sexual offences, we don't accurately record who's perpetrating violence against women and girls, and mostly also violence against trans people, that is also usually biological males. We can't develop strategies for dealing with it. We can't name it. In criminal trials now, judges are telling witnesses to describe defendants and other witnesses according to their preferred pronouns. And that includes witnesses who are giving evidence against defendants that they allege have committed assault against them. And that happened in 2017, at the trial of Tara Wood, who was convicted of assault by beating of a woman called Maria McLachlan, Wood, along with two others who were never identified, assaulted Maria McLachlan and beat her to the ground while she was waiting to attend a meeting about the Gender Recognition Act reform proposals. A group of activists tried to stop the meeting happening. While that was going on, she was assaulted. The judge told her to refer to Wood as she or the defendant, which she tried to do, but it's not a natural way to speak when you're giving evidence, especially about a traumatic event like an assault, and she reverted to using he, at the point when she was watching a video of the assault. And the judge rebuked her for that. Not only did he rebuke her, but he said that he could have awarded her financial compensation for the assault, but he wasn't going to because of her discourtesy towards Wood while she was giving evidence. If this continues, then it's very likely that at some point adults or children giving evidence about rape will be required to refer to a rapist as she. That will happen if this continues. And if that policy of using preferred pronouns in all circumstances is maintained. That undermines access to justice, women and children especially, and ultimately will undermine access to justice of anyone who's the victim of an assault by somebody who is claiming to have a gender identity other than their biological sex. Because people will be put in the position of having to deny their own perceptions while giving evidence in court. In other areas, the courts are supporting or adopting self-declaration. Recently, in an employment tribunal case brought by a woman called Maureen O'Hara, who was basically sacked from her job for saying that it's not possible for men literally to become women, essentially, she argued in court that that belief that sex is immutable and can't be changed should be treated as a protected philosophical belief for employment law purposes, as should the other belief that some people have in gender identity. But the judge didn't accept that, and the judge said that that belief that men cannot literally become women, if it's expressed in the form of saying that a trans woman is actually a man, is not a belief that can be respected in a democratic society because it would cause offence and could constitute harassment. And so her claim that her belief was a protected belief was rejected. And in different ways this is happening worldwide. Which is one of the reasons why we established the declaration, because there needs to be a pushback against this very extreme gender ideology at national level, but also at international level as well. So far, it has 6,722 signatories from 102 countries, and it's supported by 116 organisations worldwide. And we're lobbying in support of sex-based rights in the EU and the UN, and other people are lobbying in the other direction. There's a lot of lobbying going on to install gender identity thinking in international law. The Declaration has 9 articles which reaffirm sex-based rights in relation to the definition of a woman in law, the definition of motherhood, physical and reproductive integrity, freedom of opinion and expression, freedom of peaceful assembly and association, political participation, opportunities to participate actively in sports and physical education, the elimination of violence against women and the protection of the rights of the child, particularly the protection of children from being given puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones at an age when they cannot possibly validly give consent to those hormones because they can't possibly understand the implications of taking them. All of the sex-based rights in the Declaration are important to the development of effective strategies for combating violence against women and girls. 4 are particularly important. We emphasise the maintenance of women-only and girls-only spaces based on sex and not on gender identity. The emphasis of ensuring that data relating to the monitoring of sex inequality, including in criminal justice contexts, is based on sex and not gender identity. Defending freedom of speech and challenging the imposition of compelled speech, such as what happened to Maria McLaughlin. And in defending women's rights to assemble, associate and organise as a sex, separately from biological males. We don't know how prevalent violence against women and girls really is. It's probably more prevalent than we realise, even though we know that it's very prevalent. But what we do know has come into the public domain because of the feminist movement. The work of UN organisations like the CEDAW and the Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women would never have come into existence if the feminist movement hadn't first enabled women to name experiences of men's violence towards them. Our knowledge of violence against women and girls grew from the work of the feminist organisations all over the world, which set up rape support services, movements to establish shelters for women and children escaping domestic abuse, and other services and organisations working to challenge violence against women and girls. Those groups, many of them set up in the 70s, were women-only groups. In women-only groups, women began to realise that their experiences of child sexual assault, sexual violence as adults, domestic abuse, and other violence were not unique to them individually. And when they started to realise that these experiences were shared by large numbers of women because they started talking to other women about them, they began to understand that this violence was a tool of dominance and control. It wasn't just random individual behaviour. Women-only groups enabled women to name their experiences without feeling constrained or silenced by the presence of men. And women are constrained and silenced when talking about sexual violence, particularly by the presence of men, no matter how nice those men might be and no matter how well-meaning they might be. Women will not speak as freely about experiences of sexual violence as they will in a women-only group. So women's ability to freely associate, assemble and organise on the basis of our common experiences was crucial to the development of the feminist movement, and it's crucial to its continuation. We cannot continue it if we can't meet in women-only groups and set up women-only organisations. So that's one of the purposes of the Declaration, to promote that possibility internationally. There are summaries of the Declaration around the room and outside if you'd like to have a look at it. If you'd like to sign it, you can find it on our website, which is www.womensdeclaration.com. So please take one and see what you think of it. Thank you.